"You're after my money," he said. "I'm not the father of these twins." But 5 years later, the twins' faces told the truth. Lambert almost didn't notice them at first. The room was crowded in a quiet way. Polite voices, soft laughter, people standing too close to tables with half-empty glasses. He had already shaken enough hands to feel tired of smiling. He was halfway through another safe conversation when a sound cut through everything else. A laugh, not loud, not dramatic, just familiar. His body reacted before his mind did. He turned without thinking, and that was when he saw her. Ami stood near the far wall, holding 2 small cups of juice, her hair pulled back the way she used to wear it when she didn't want to be noticed. She looked older, but not in a way that felt sad, just changed, like someone who had lived a lot in a short amount of time, and beside her were 2 children. A boy and a girl, maybe 5 years old, standing close to her legs, one on each side. The boy was talking quickly about something Lambert couldn't hear. The girl was watching the room, quiet, taking everything in. Lambert felt his chest tighten, because the boy had his eyes. Not just similar, not close. The exact same shape, the same slight droop at the corners, the same way they seemed to notice more than they revealed. And the girl tilted her head in a way Lambert had seen in the mirror his entire life, whenever he was trying to understand something without asking questions. He forgot where he was, forgot the fundraiser, forgot the people, forgot the conversation he had been in just seconds before. The world shrank to 3 figures across the room. Amy hadn't seen him yet. She was focused on the children, brushing a small drop of juice from the girl's hand, smiling with a kind of tired patience that only comes from years of doing everything alone. Lambert stood completely still. His heartbeat felt loud in his ears, slow and heavy, as if his body was warning him not to move too quickly, not to disturb a moment that felt fragile. The boy laughed again, and this time Lambert heard something else in it, his own voice, not the sound of it, the feeling of it, the same rhythm, the same lightness that used to appear when he laughed without worrying about who was watching. His throat went dry. He had spent 5 years convincing himself of a story, a clean story, a safe one, a version where he had been smart, careful, protected. But standing there, looking at those 2 faces, something quiet and undeniable settled inside him. No paperwork could change what he was seeing. No argument could undo it. Whatever he had believed before no longer mattered, because the truth was already standing in front of him, holding a cup of juice, laughing softly, and calling another man dad without knowing it. Lambert didn't step forward. He didn't step back either. He simply stayed where he was, as if moving in any direction might break something that couldn't be repaired. Around him the room continued as normal. People laughed. Glasses clinked. Someone nearby thanked him for sponsoring the event. He nodded without hearing the words. His attention never left the children. The boy shifted his weight from one foot to the other, impatient, full of energy. The girl stayed close to Amy's side, her fingers wrapped loosely around her mother's sleeve, her eyes quietly scanning the room. Lambert noticed small details he had no right to notice. The way the boy pushed his hair back from his forehead, exactly how Lambert did it when he was nervous. The way the girl narrowed her eyes slightly before speaking, as if she needed a moment to trust her own thoughts. These weren't just similarities, they were habits, the kind that come from living inside a body, not from coincidence. Lambert felt something press against his ribs, slow and heavy. He had spent years building walls that no one else could see. Layers of logic, distance, control. He had told himself he didn't need anyone, that emotional risk was weakness, that leaving had been the responsible choice. Standing there now, none of those thoughts felt solid. They felt thin, fragile, like excuses that only worked in silence. Ami finally looked up. For half a second her face remained neutral, polite, unaware. Then her eyes met his, and everything stopped. Her posture changed instantly. Not fear, not anger, just a quiet tension, the kind that comes from recognizing a past you thought was finished. The boy followed her gaze. So did the girl. 3 pairs of eyes turned toward Lambert at the same time. No one spoke. No one moved. The space between them felt suddenly larger than the room itself, filled with years that had passed without permission, with words that had never been said, with a truth that no longer needed proof. Lambert felt something shift inside him. Not panic, not guilt, something quieter, recognition. For years he had told himself that what he did made sense, that doubt was safer than trust, that walking away had been the logical choice. He'd repeated that story so often it had started to sound like truth. But now, standing across the room from 2 children who shared his face, that story collapsed without resistance. A single thought formed, slow and heavy. What kind of man looks at someone he loves and chooses fear instead of belief? What kind of man hears the words "I'm pregnant" and only thinks about what he might lose? And then another question followed, softer, more uncomfortable. What kind of woman carries that moment alone for 5 years without trying to punish the person who left? Amy hadn't chased him, hadn't demanded anything, hadn't tried to defend herself. She had simply continued living, raising 2 children, answering their questions, holding her life together without ever using his absence as a weapon. Lambert realized something he had avoided for a long time. Walking away hadn't protected him. It had only delayed the moment where he would finally have to face who he was when no one else was watching. Stories like this don't usually begin with dramatic events. They begin with quiet choices, the kind that feel small at the time, almost reasonable, but slowly shape entire lives without asking permission. This is one of those stories. Not about perfect people, not about heroes or villains, just about 2 ordinary adults who loved each other in a simple way, and the moment fear stepped in and changed everything. Welcome to Mr. Williams' Story Time. Here, we don't rush, we don't shout, we don't pretend life is cleaner than it really is. We tell stories the way real life unfolds, slowly, honestly, with room for mistakes and second chances. So get comfortable, because this isn't just a story about Lambert and Amy. It's about the kind of choices people make when they're afraid, and the quiet consequences that follow them long after the moment has passed. Before we go back to the beginning of Lambert and Amy's story, let me say this. If you enjoy quiet, emotional stories like this, the kind that feel real, simple, and honest, take a second to like and subscribe. It helps this channel more than you know, and it allows me to keep sharing stories that focus on people, not noise. Now, let's go back to where it all started. Lambert met Amy on a day that didn't feel important. There was no special reason for him to be where he was, no big event, no dramatic shift in his life. Just a quiet afternoon where he had left work earlier than usual and wandered into a small cafe he had never noticed before. The place was nearly empty. A few tables, soft music, the kind of space people go to when they want to think without being disturbed. Amy was behind the counter, struggling with the coffee machine like it had personally offended her. Lambert watched for a moment before speaking. "Does it always fight back like that?" he asked, smiling. She looked up, slightly embarrassed, then laughed. "Only when I'm pretending to know what I'm doing." Her laugh was easy, not careful, not polite, just natural. Lambert ordered something simple. He didn't even remember what it was later. What stayed with him was the way she handed him the cup with both hands, as if she wanted to make sure he didn't drop it. "First time here?" she asked. "Yeah," he said. "Feels quiet. That's why I like it," she replied. "It's one of the few places that doesn't expect anything from you." That sentence stayed in his mind longer than it should have. They talked for only a few minutes, about the cafe, about work, about nothing that sounded important. But when Lambert left, he realized something felt different. Not exciting, not intense, just calm. And for a man who spent his life staying alert, that feeling was new. Lambert started visiting the cafe more often after that. At first, he told himself it was convenient. On his way home, easy stop, nothing deeper than that. But after a few weeks, he noticed something about his habits. He only came on days when Amy was working. They never called it dates. There was no clear beginning, just a pattern that formed quietly. He would order coffee. She would tease him about always choosing the same thing. He would sit near the window. She would join him when the place was empty. Sometimes they talked about work, sometimes about books, sometimes about nothing at all. One evening, he stayed longer than usual. The sky outside had darkened, and the cafe lights made the space feel smaller, warmer. Amy sat across from him, stirring her drink slowly. "Do you ever feel like you're always preparing for something that never actually happens?" she asked. Lambert thought for a moment. "Yeah," he said. "Like I'm waiting for a version of life that hasn't arrived yet." She smiled, not because it was funny, but because it felt familiar. After that, their walks began. No plans, no destinations, just slow steps through the city, letting conversations wander the same way their feet did. Sometimes they spoke for hours. Sometimes they didn't speak at all. And somehow, the silence never felt uncomfortable. It felt shared. Over time, Lambert noticed he was telling Amy things he rarely said out loud. Not dramatic secrets, just small truths. That he felt tired even when nothing was wrong. That he didn't like parties, even though people assumed he did. That he often felt like he was playing a role instead of being himself. Amy never rushed to respond. She listened the way people do when they aren't waiting for their turn to speak. One night, as they sat on a bench watching cars pass in slow lines of light, she said quietly, "I like you because you don't perform. You're just present." The words surprised him. He had spent years believing he had to impress people to be accepted, to stay useful, to stay safe. Hearing someone appreciate him for simply existing felt unfamiliar. "Being real feels risky," he admitted. "I've spent most of my life pretending to be someone else." Amy didn't try to fix that. I think most people do, she said. They just don't say it. From that moment, something shifted. Their conversations grew slower, deeper, less about what they did, more about who they were. Lambert didn't talk about his past easily. It wasn't painful in a dramatic way. No shocking stories, no big tragedies. Just a quiet history of learning how not to need anyone. He grew up watching his mother work too much and hope too little. The man who was supposed to stay had promised her everything: stability, love, a future that felt safe. Then one day he simply stopped coming home. No explanation, no goodbye. Lambert learned early that promises were fragile things. He watched his mother rebuild her life without bitterness, but also without trust. She depended on herself for everything, and slowly, so did he. Success felt like protection. Independence felt like control. Love makes people careless, he told Amy once, half joking. She looked at him for a long moment before replying. He smiled, but the words stayed with him. Because deep down, Lambert wasn't afraid of being alone. He was afraid of becoming someone who believed in something that could disappear. Not loud, not dramatic, not the kind of person who needed to be seen. She had a way of entering rooms quietly and leaving impressions without trying. She noticed small things, changes in tone, shifts in mood, the way people avoided certain topics without realizing it. Conflict made her uncomfortable, not because she was weak, but because she believed most arguments came from people trying to protect something they didn't know how to name. She hated asking for help, hated being a burden, hated the idea of needing more than she could give. I don't like taking space from people, she once said. Lambert frowned. You're allowed to exist. She smiled gently. I know. I just prefer not to take more than I need. Her way of loving was quiet. She remembered details, listened more than she spoke, showed care through presence, not words. She didn't demand promises. She offered patience. And without realizing it, she created a kind of emotional safety Lambert had never experienced before, the kind that didn't pressure him to become better, only more honest. With Amy, Lambert didn't feel watched. There were no expectations to impress, no pressure to prove anything, no sense that he had to perform a role. They could sit together for long stretches without speaking, each lost in their own thoughts, and still feel connected. On weekends, they stayed in more than they went out. Simple meals, quiet music, the kind of comfort that doesn't announce itself. Amy never asked where he was going or who he was texting. Lambert never felt the need to explain himself. Their relationship didn't feel like something he had to manage. It felt like something that simply existed. And for a man who spent his life controlling outcomes, that was new, comfortable, almost dangerous, because safety made him lower his guard, and lowering his guard meant opening himself to something he had spent years avoiding, the possibility that this time he might actually care enough to get hurt. The longer Lambert stayed with Amy, the more something uneasy grew inside him. Not doubt about her, doubt about himself. He noticed how easily she trusted him, how naturally she assumed he would stay, how little she protected herself around him, and instead of feeling honored, he felt exposed. He began to realize that for the first time in his life, someone saw him as permanent, not temporary, not replaceable, not optional. That thought scared him more than any breakup ever had, because leaving meant control. But staying meant responsibility. It meant becoming the kind of person who could hurt someone deeply without meaning to. It meant believing in something without a safety plan. So even while he smiled, even while he listened, even while he walked beside her through quiet streets, a part of Lambert was already preparing for the moment everything would fall apart. Not because he wanted it to, but because he didn't know how to live in a life where things didn't eventually go wrong. Amy didn't say goodbye. She simply stopped answering. At first, Lambert assumed it was nothing, a busy week, a missed message, life getting in the way it sometimes did. He sent a short text. Hey, everything okay? No reply. The next day he called. It rang until voicemail. 2 days passed, then 5. By the end of the first week, Lambert found himself checking his phone more often than he wanted to admit. Not in a dramatic way, just small unconscious movements, glancing at the screen while waiting for coffee, looking at it again before going to bed. Still nothing. By the second week, concern replaced confusion. He visited the cafe where they had first met. One of the workers told him Amy had taken time off. Do you know when she'll be back? Lambert asked. The girl shrugged. No idea. She just said she needed space. Space. The word sat strangely with him. He replayed their last conversation in his head, searching for mistakes. Something he might have said wrong, something he might have missed. There had been no signs, no tension, no distance, just quiet routines continuing as usual. By the third week, Lambert stopped pretending he wasn't worried. He walked past places they used to go together, half expecting to see her sitting on a bench or waiting at a corner like nothing had changed. But the city felt different now. too wide, too silent, and for the first time since meeting her, Lambert felt something he wasn't prepared for. Not anger, not jealousy, just a quiet fear that something important was slipping away without giving him a chance to understand why. Lambert told himself to stay calm. He reminded himself that people were allowed to disappear for a while, that space didn't automatically mean rejection, that he wasn't entitled to constant explanations. But his thoughts didn't listen. They moved in circles, slow and restless. He checked his phone first thing in the morning. He checked it again before every meeting. He checked it at night even though he already knew the screen would still be empty. He drafted messages he never sent, honest ones, then deleted all of them. Because he didn't want to sound desperate. Because he didn't want to push. At work, he struggled to focus. Conversations blurred together. Tasks took longer than they should. People noticed he was quieter, more distracted. "Everything okay?" a colleague asked one afternoon. "Yeah," Lambert replied automatically. The word felt false the moment he said it. The truth was, he had no idea what was okay anymore, not knowing where Amy was hurt more than any argument ever could. Because at least arguments came with answers. Silence came with nothing, just empty space where certainty used to be. Amy came back on a Thursday evening. Lambert was in his apartment, sitting on the edge of the couch, scrolling through his phone for no reason when he heard a soft knock at the door. Not loud, not urgent, just careful. For a second he didn't move. He stared at the door as if it might disappear if he stood up. Then he opened it. Amy stood there with a small bag over her shoulder. Her hair was pulled back, her face pale, her eyes tired in a way that couldn't be blamed on lack of sleep alone. "Hi," she said quietly. Lambert felt a rush of emotions he didn't know how to organize, a hint of anger he didn't want to admit. "Where have you been?" he asked, trying to keep his voice steady. "I needed time," she replied. "I didn't know how to explain it before." She stepped inside, looking around the apartment like it was both familiar and distant. They sat down across from each other. The silence felt heavier than it ever had before. Amy folded her hands in her lap. They were trembling slightly. "I wasn't avoiding you," she said. "I was trying to understand something myself first." Lambert noticed how thin she looked, how her shoulders seemed smaller, like she was carrying something invisible but heavy. He wanted to reach for her. And for the first time since meeting her, Lambert realized he was afraid of what she was about to say. Amy took a slow breath. Not the kind people take when they're nervous, the kind they take when they're trying to stay steady. "There's something I need to tell you," she said. Lambert nodded, even though his chest felt tight. She didn't look at him right away. Her eyes stayed on her hands, fingers gently pressing together. "Sure about what?" he asked. She finally looked up. Her eyes were calm, but there was something fragile behind them, like she was holding herself together with quiet effort. "I'm pregnant," she said. "With twins." The words landed softly. No dramatic pause, no raised voice, just a simple sentence. Lambert felt as if the room had shifted slightly out of place. "Twins." Amy waited. "I didn't disappear because of you," she said. "I disappeared because I needed to decide how I felt before bringing this to you." She reached into her bag and pulled out a folded piece of paper. An ultrasound image. Lambert stared at it without taking it. 2 small shapes, 2 lives. He had never seen anything like that before, not in a way that felt connected to him. "I'm not asking for anything," Amy added quickly. "I just thought you should know." The room was silent again, but this time the silence felt different, heavier, as if everything that had felt safe before had just been replaced with something permanent and irreversible. Lambert didn't react the way people expect. He didn't raise his voice, didn't pace the room, didn't ask a dozen questions. He simply sat there, staring at the paper in Amy's hand, feeling his thoughts begin to scatter. Twins. The word echoed again. His mind moved faster than his emotions could follow. Hospitals, lawyers, schedules, responsibilities he had never planned for. And beneath all of it, something older and quieter surfaced. His mother, standing in the kitchen years ago, trying to pretend she wasn't disappointed, the way she had learned to expect nothing so she wouldn't feel abandoned again. A promise he had made to himself as a child, "I won't be the one who gets left behind." But now, he realized, the promise had changed without him noticing. It wasn't about being left anymore. It was about being trapped. He looked at Amy, sitting across from him, still calm, still not demanding anything. And instead of seeing the woman he loved, his fear showed him a different picture. A future he couldn't control. A life where mistakes would matter more than money. A role he didn't know how to play. Lambert felt his chest tighten, his breath slow and shallow. He wanted to believe her. He wanted to trust the moment. But fear spoke first, and fear sounded convincing. Lambert finally spoke, but his voice didn't sound like his own. It was calm, too calm, the kind of calm that comes from shutting something down instead of facing it. "You know this changes everything," he said quietly. Amy nodded. "I know." He stood up, not looking at her, and walked a few steps toward the window. The city lights outside felt distant, unreal. For a moment, neither of them said anything. Then he turned back. His expression wasn't angry. It was guarded. "You're only after my money," he said, "and I'm not the father of these twins." The words hung in the air. They weren't shouted. They weren't dramatic. They were spoken like a conclusion he had already reached. Amy stared at him, not in shock, not in disbelief, just very still. "I never asked you for anything," she said slowly. "Not once." Lambert didn't respond. He had already crossed a line in his mind, and going back felt harder than continuing forward. "I just wanted you to know," she added. "That's all." Her voice didn't shake, but something in the room changed. The space between them no longer felt safe. It felt final. After Lambert spoke, nothing happened right away. No shouting, no crying, no dramatic reaction. Amy just sat there, looking at him as if she were seeing a different person than the one she thought she knew. The room felt suddenly larger, emptier. "I never asked you for anything," she said again, softer this time. "I didn't even come here expecting a decision." Lambert didn't reply. He felt frozen inside his own body, trapped between what he had just said and what he was afraid to admit. Amy slowly stood up. She folded the ultrasound paper and placed it back into her bag with careful movements, like she was handling something fragile. "I just wanted you to know the truth," she said. "What you do with it is up to you." She walked toward the door. Lambert watched her, his mind racing, his chest tight, but his mouth empty of words. At the door, she paused for a moment. Not to beg, not to argue, just to look at him one last time. Her eyes weren't angry. They were tired. Then she left. The door closed quietly behind her, and Lambert stood alone in his apartment, surrounded by silence that felt heavier than any argument ever could, because for the first time, he understood something he had avoided his entire life. Some choices don't announce their consequences. They simply remove people from your world and wait for you to notice what's missing. Amy didn't raise her voice. She didn't argue. She didn't ask him to reconsider. She simply stood there for a moment, her hands still resting on the door handle, as if she were giving herself time to understand what had just happened. Then she turned back toward him. "I wasn't asking you to save me," she said quietly, "or to fix anything." Lambert watched her, confused by how steady she looked. "I just wanted you to know," she continued, "because you were part of this. Whether you believe it or not." There was no anger in her tone, no bitterness, just honesty. She took a small step closer, not to persuade him, but to make sure he heard her clearly. "I didn't come here for money. I came because I trusted you enough to tell you the truth." Lambert felt something tighten in his chest, but he said nothing. Amy nodded once, almost to herself. "I guess that was my mistake." The words weren't sharp. They weren't meant to hurt. They were simply a conclusion she had reached quietly. And in that moment, Lambert realized something he hadn't expected. Her calm wasn't weakness. It was acceptance. Amy didn't wait for a response. She didn't ask if he was sure, didn't list reasons, didn't remind him of their history. She simply adjusted the strap of her bag on her shoulder and looked around the apartment one last time. Not like someone saying goodbye, like someone closing a chapter. Lambert expected something more. Tears, anger, a final attempt to change his mind, but none of it came. "I won't try to convince you," she said. "That wouldn't be fair to either of us." Her voice stayed even, steady in a way that made the moment feel heavier than any argument could have. "You're allowed to feel however you feel," she added. "I just needed to tell you the truth." Lambert opened his mouth, then closed it again. He didn't know what he wanted her to say. All the words he had prepared in his head felt useless now. Amy gave him a small, polite smile, the kind people give strangers. "I hope you find what you're looking for," she said. And that was all. No scene, no fight, just a quiet ending that left no room for misunderstanding. Amy opened the door slowly. The hallway outside was quiet, empty, just like it had been when she arrived. She paused for a moment on the threshold, her hand still on the door frame, as if she were making sure she remembered the space clearly. Then she stepped out. Lambert stood where he was, watching her back as she walked down the corridor, not rushed. She didn't look over her shoulder. She didn't wait for him to call her name. And just like that, she was gone. The apartment felt different immediately, not emptier, quieter, as if something essential had been removed without leaving a trace. Lambert remained standing in the middle of the room, surrounded by familiar furniture that suddenly felt unfamiliar. The air felt still, heavy, and for the first time the silence didn't feel peaceful. It felt permanent. At first, Lambert told himself he had done the right thing. He walked through the apartment slowly, replaying the conversation in his head, adjusting details, smoothing edges, rewriting the moment until it sounded reasonable. Anyone would have been cautious, he thought. Anyone would have needed proof. Anyone would have questioned something that serious. He told himself he had protected his future, protected his stability, protected himself from being manipulated. He poured a glass of water he didn't drink. He sat down, then stood up again. The words he had said still felt sharp in his mind, but he wrapped them in logic. I didn't accuse her. I was just being honest. Each thought landed like a small shield, not to defend the truth, to defend the discomfort, because beneath all the reasoning, something else kept pressing forward. A quiet image of her standing at the door, and no amount of logic could fully explain why that image made his chest feel heavier than it should have. The days after Amy left felt strangely normal. Lambert went to work, answered emails, met deadlines. From the outside, nothing had changed, but inside, everything felt slightly out of place. He caught himself reaching for his phone in the evenings, the way he always had, ready to send her a message about something small, a line from a book, a thought he couldn't explain, a moment that reminded him of her. Then he remembered, and put the phone down. His apartment stayed too quiet, the kind of quiet that doesn't relax you. It keeps you alert, waiting for a sound that never comes. He avoided places they used to go together, not because they hurt, but because they felt unfinished. Sometimes, in the middle of unrelated moments, a simple thought would surface without warning. She didn't argue, not in anger, not in desperation. She had simply accepted his decision and walked away. That was the part he couldn't explain. People usually fought when something mattered. They demanded answers. They tried to change outcomes. Amy had done none of that, and slowly, a new feeling began to replace certainty. Not regret, not yet. Just a quiet discomfort that refused to leave. A sense that something important had ended without ever truly being understood. If this moment feels familiar to you, if you've ever watched someone walk away without a fight, I'd love to hear your thoughts. You can share them in the comments. Sometimes the quiet endings stay with us longer than the loud ones. Now, let's see how Amy's life unfolds after she leaves. Amy didn't tell many people. Not because she was ashamed, but because she didn't have the energy to explain something that still felt unreal to her. Most days, she went to work as usual, smiled when required, and kept her hands resting lightly over her stomach when no one was looking. At night, when the world finally quieted down, the weight of it all settled in. 2 heartbeats, 2 futures, 2 lives depending entirely on her. She sat on the edge of her bed more than once, staring at the wall, trying to understand how something so big could have entered her life so silently. There was no partner to share the news with, no one to feel the first movements beside her, no voice in the dark asking if she was okay. She learned to answer that question herself. Some mornings she woke up calm, even hopeful. Other mornings she felt overwhelmed by thoughts she didn't want to finish. How will I afford this? What if I get sick? What if I'm not enough for 2 people? But each time fear appeared, something stronger followed, a quiet determination. She reminded herself that love didn't require permission, that presence mattered more than promises, that being alone didn't mean being incapable. She placed her hand over her stomach and spoke softly, even though no one could hear her yet. I'm here, she whispered. I won't leave. And for the first time since walking out of Lambert's apartment, she believed it. The day the twins were born didn't feel magical. It felt long. The hospital room was quiet except for the steady sounds of machines and distant footsteps in the hallway. Amy lay on the bed, exhausted, her body trembling from effort she didn't know she was capable of. There was no one holding her hand, no one pacing the room, just a nurse speaking calmly, telling her to breathe, reminding her that she was doing well. When the first cry filled the air, Amy didn't cry. She laughed, not because she was happy in a simple way, but because the sound felt unreal, like proof that everything she had been imagining was now real and permanent. The nurse placed the baby gently on her chest, a boy, small, warm, alive. A few minutes later, another cry, a girl. Amy's arms felt too small to hold them both at once. She looked down at their faces, so close to hers, so dependent, and felt a wave of emotion she couldn't name. Not fear, not relief, something deeper, responsibility mixed with wonder. I did it, she whispered, more to herself than to anyone else. The nurse smiled. You're not alone anymore. Amy looked at the 2 tiny faces resting against her skin and realized something quietly powerful. She hadn't just brought them into the world. They had brought her into a new one, too. Amy spent 2 days in the hospital. Most of the time, she just watched them sleep. The boy moved even in rest, small hands curling and uncurling, as if he were already curious about the world. The girl stayed still, her breathing soft and steady, her face calm in a way that felt older than her age. The nurse asked her what their names were. Amy hesitated. She had thought about it during her pregnancy, but saying the names out loud made everything feel more real. Cody, she said, touching the boy's hand gently. The nurse wrote it down. And the girl? Amy looked at her for a moment longer. Ariana. The names felt right. Not special, not dramatic, just honest. She whispered them softly, testing the sound of them in the air. Cody, Ariana. 2 separate lives, 2 separate futures. Both beginning in her arms. She realized then that names weren't just labels, and she was ready to keep them. Not because of exhaustion alone, but because silence feels different when you're responsible for 2 lives. Cody cried often, restless and loud, as if he were already impatient with the world. Ariana cried less, but when she did, her sounds were soft and fragile, the kind that made Amy sit up instantly, heart racing. Some nights, Amy didn't even bother lying down. She sat on the couch with one baby on each side, feeding them slowly, her eyes half closed, her body heavy with fatigue. The clock moved forward in small, quiet jumps. 2, 13 a.m., 3, 47 a.m., 5, 2 a.m. There was no one to trade shifts with, no one to say, I've got this, go rest. Just her. She learned to function on broken sleep, to drink coffee that went cold before she remembered it existed, to move through days with a gentle haze in her mind. Sometimes, in the middle of the night, she felt overwhelmed, not by the babies, by the weight of being the only one. She would sit there, holding them both, whispering the same words over and over. It's okay. I'm here. You're safe. She wasn't sure if she was saying it for them or for herself, but slowly, night after night, she realized something. She was tired, but she wasn't lost. And even in exhaustion, she felt a quiet strength growing, the kind that comes from showing up even when no one is watching. When maternity leave ended, reality became sharper. Amy returned to work with dark circles under her eyes and a routine that felt like a puzzle missing half its pieces. Morning started before the sun. She fed the twins, changed them, packed small bags with bottles and spare clothes, then rushed them to a nearby daycare before heading to her job. Every goodbye felt rushed, every pickup felt late. She checked her phone constantly, not for messages but for updates from the daycare. Cody ate well today. Those short sentences became her comfort. At work she smiled when required, focused when needed, but her thoughts stayed with 2 small faces waiting for her. Evenings were a blur of feeding, bathing, cleaning, and trying to make time feel meaningful instead of rushed. Sometimes she sat on the floor between them while they played, too tired to speak, just watching their hands explore toys like the world was something new and gentle. There were days she felt stretched thin, not emotionally, physically, like her body was always in 2 places at once, but no matter how tired she felt, she never questioned why she was doing it. Because every time Cody laughed or Ariana reached for her hand, she was reminded of something simple. She wasn't balancing life, she was building it. Cody started asking questions as soon as he learned how to speak clearly. Simple ones. Why is the sky blue? Why do dogs run so fast? Why does Ariana cry when I take her toy? Amy answered everything with patience, even when she was tired. But as Cody grew older, his questions changed. They became more thoughtful, more personal. One afternoon, as they sat at the small kitchen table eating cereal, Cody looked up at her with a serious expression. Mom, he said, how come some kids get picked up by 2 people? Amy paused. She knew this question would come eventually. Different families work in different ways, she replied gently. Some have 1 parent, some have 2, some have more. Cody thought about this for a moment. Do I have 2? He asked. Amy felt a quiet ache in her chest, but her voice stayed calm. You have me, she said, and you have Ariana, and you have people who care about you. He nodded slowly, trying to understand. But do I have a dad? He asked. The room went quiet, not in a heavy way, in a waiting way. Amy looked at her son, curious, open, trusting, and realized something important. This wasn't a moment she could avoid. It was a moment she had to meet with honesty. Ariana noticed things Cody didn't. Where Cody asked questions out loud, Ariana watched quietly. She studied people the way some children study puzzles, taking her time before forming opinions. She was the kind of child who held onto Amy's hand a little longer than necessary, the kind who looked up when voices changed tone, even if the words stayed gentle. At daycare, the teachers often said the same thing. She's very observant. Ariana didn't talk much about her feelings, but she showed them in small ways. If Ami looked tired, Ariana brought her a toy and placed it carefully on her lap. If the house felt too quiet, she hummed softly to herself, filling the space without demanding attention. One evening, while Amy was folding laundry, Ariana sat on the bed watching her. Mom, she said, after a long pause, are you lonely? The question caught Amy off guard. "Why do you ask?" she replied. Ariana shrugged. "Sometimes you look like you're thinking about someone." Amy smiled gently. "I think about lots of things." Ariana nodded, satisfied with the answer, but stayed close. She didn't need explanations, she just needed presence, and in her own quiet way, she was already learning how to offer it. The question came on a quiet evening. Dinner was finished. The dishes were drying on the counter. Cody and Ariana were sitting on the living room floor, building something that didn't seem to follow any rules. Cody suddenly stopped and looked up. "Mom," he said, "how come we don't have a dad like other kids?" The words were simple. There was no sadness in his voice, no complaint, just curiosity. Amy felt her breath slow. "Some families look different," she said gently. "That doesn't mean anything is wrong." Cody frowned slightly. "But my friend Leo has a dad who picks him up." Ariana looked at Amy quietly, waiting. Amy nodded. "That's true. Leo's family works that way. Ours works a different way." Cody thought about this for a moment. "Did we do something wrong?" he asked. The question landed softly, but it hurt more than she expected. Amy shook her head immediately. "No, never. You didn't do anything wrong." "Then where is he?" Cody asked. Amy looked at both of them, two small faces, open and trusting, and realized the answer didn't need to be complicated. "He's not part of our lives," she said, "but that doesn't change how loved you are." Cody nodded slowly, trying to understand. Ariana didn't say anything. She simply moved closer to Amy and rested her head against her side. And in that quiet moment, Amy knew something for sure. They weren't missing love. They were surrounded by it. Later that night, after Cody and Ariana were in bed, Amy sat alone on the couch, replaying the conversation in her mind. She wondered if she had said too much, or not enough. She didn't want to create a story that would confuse them later. She didn't want to build something that would eventually collapse under its own weight. So the next morning, she chose honesty, simple honesty. At breakfast, she poured cereal into their bowls and sat across from them. "About what you asked yesterday," she said softly. "I want you to know something." Cody looked up immediately. Ariana followed. "I didn't keep anything from you. I didn't hide anyone from you. Your dad knew about you before you were born." Cody blinked. "He did?" "Yes," Amy replied. "He just wasn't ready to be part of our lives." Ariana tilted her head slightly. "Was he bad?" Amy shook her head. "No, he was just afraid." Cody thought about that for a moment. "Like when I don't want to try something new at school?" he asked. Amy smiled gently. "Yes, like that." Neither of them asked more. They didn't need details. They didn't need a villain. They just needed to know the truth in a way that didn't make them feel unwanted. And as Amy watched them finish their breakfast, laughing over spilled milk and crooked spoons, she felt something settle inside her. Honesty didn't make the story heavier. It made it kinder. Amy never spoke about loneliness out loud. Not to friends, not to coworkers, not even to herself in clear words. It wasn't the kind of loneliness that came from being surrounded by nothing. Her days were full. Noise, questions, responsibilities, small hands pulling at her clothes. But at night, when the twins were asleep and the house finally went quiet, something gentle and heavy settled over her. She sat at the kitchen table with a cup of tea she rarely finished. The silence wasn't painful, just noticeable. There were moments she wanted to share. A funny thing Cody said, the way Ariana learned a new word, how proud she felt watching them grow. But there was no one to send those moments to, no second voice in the room, no adult laughter. She didn't miss Lambert specifically, she missed the idea of being seen, of having someone witness her life, not just rely on her to hold it together. Sometimes she stood in the doorway of the twins' room and watched them sleep, their chests rising and falling in quiet rhythm. And she felt two emotions at once, gratitude for what she had, and a soft ache for what she didn't. She never let that ache grow into bitterness. She accepted it as part of being human. Some nights she whispered into the dark, "I'm okay," and most of the time it was true. But on the nights when it wasn't, she still stayed, still showed up, still loved them with everything she had. And in that quiet commitment, even her loneliness became something steady, not a wound, but a reminder that her heart was still open. Lambert's life moved forward without pause, not because he was especially happy, but because he was very good at staying busy. After Amy left, he poured himself into work with a kind of quiet intensity that felt productive and harmless on the surface. Long hours, extra projects, new responsibilities. He became the person people depended on, the one who answered emails late at night, the one who volunteered for difficult tasks, the one who never seemed tired. Promotions came quickly, not because he asked for them, but because he never said no. His name appeared on company emails more often. His opinions carried more weight in meetings. People started referring to him as someone who had a future, and he believed it, not in an excited way, in a controlled way. Work gave him something simple, clear goals, measurable success, no emotional risk. Every achievement felt clean, earned, safe, and for a while that was enough, because as long as he stayed focused on progress, he didn't have to think about what he had left behind. As Lambert's career grew, so did everything around it. He moved into a larger apartment, one with wide windows, quiet hallways, and a view that made people pause when they visited. He bought furniture that matched the space not because he loved it, but because it felt appropriate for the life he was building. A better car followed, then nicer clothes, then dinners at places where menus didn't list prices. From the outside, it looked like success. People complimented his life often. Lambert smiled and nodded each time, not because he disagreed, but because he didn't know what else to say. His apartment stayed clean, too clean, no photos on the walls, no personal items on the tables, no signs of anyone else living there. Even his weekends felt planned. Gym in the morning, errands in the afternoon, dinner with colleagues or acquaintances he never grew close to. Everything looked polished, organized, impressive. But when he came home at night and closed the door behind him, the silence felt different than it used to. Not peaceful, just empty. And for the first time, Lambert realized something uncomfortable. He had built a life that worked perfectly on paper, but had no one inside it waiting for him. Lambert didn't avoid relationships. He just never stayed in them long. At first, things always felt easy. Conversations flowed, dinners were pleasant, messages were exchanged regularly. But the moment something deeper appeared, something shifted. When someone asked where the relationship was going, when someone wanted to talk about feelings, Lambert pulled back, not dramatically, quietly. He became distant, slower to reply, more focused on work, less available for plans. He told himself he was just busy, that timing was wrong, that expectations were too high, that he wasn't meant for emotional dependence. Eventually, each relationship ended the same way. A calm conversation, mutual agreement, no big conflict. People described him as kind, respectful, emotionally reserved. No one ever accused him of being cruel, but no one stayed either. And as time passed, Lambert began to notice a pattern he didn't want to name. The problem wasn't compatibility, it was closeness. Every time someone started to matter, he felt the same quiet urge to leave before they could expect more from him than he was willing to give. Over time, Lambert learned how to keep conversations light. He talked about work, about current events, about travel plans he never finalized. But he avoided questions that felt personal. He didn't share worries, didn't speak about fears, didn't admit when something bothered him. When people opened up to him, he listened politely, offered thoughtful responses, but never let the conversation turn inward. It wasn't intentional, it was practiced. Even with friends, he stayed on the surface. He was present, but not involved, available, but not invested. And the longer he lived this way, the more natural it felt. Until one evening, during a quiet dinner with someone he had been seeing for months, she looked at him and said gently, "I feel like I know everything about your schedule, but nothing about you." Lambert smiled and changed the subject, but later that night, alone in his apartment, her words returned to him without warning. Not as an accusation, as an observation. And for the first time, he wondered if emotional distance wasn't something that just happened to him, but something he had carefully built. Lambert never forgot the date. He told himself it was just a coincidence at first, the way certain days stay in your memory even when they no longer belong to your life. But every year, when that day arrived, something in him changed, not dramatically, just quietly. He noticed it in small ways. He felt less interested in work, less focused on conversations, less willing to stay out late. Sometimes he didn't even realize why he felt off until he checked the calendar and saw the number staring back at him. He never marked it, never mentioned it, never acknowledged it out loud. But he remembered. He imagined 2 children somewhere in the world, blowing out candles, opening small gifts, laughing in a way he would never hear. He didn't picture their faces. He didn't know what they looked like, but he thought about them anyway, not as real people, as a possibility he had chosen not to explore. On those nights, he usually went home early. He sat in his quiet apartment with a drink he didn't finish, staring at nothing in particular, and for a few hours each year, the life he had built felt less impressive. Not because it was bad, but because it suddenly felt incomplete in a way he couldn't explain to anyone else. Lambert never called it regret. That word felt too dramatic, too emotional, too final. Reflection, curiosity, what if? But deep down, he knew the truth. Something inside him felt unresolved, not broken, not painful, just unfinished. There were moments, usually late at night, when he imagined a different version of his life. One where he had stayed, one where he had asked questions instead of making accusations, one where fear hadn't spoken first. He wondered what the twins' voices sounded like, whether they laughed easily, whether they were quiet or loud or somewhere in between. He wondered what kind of father he would have been, not perfect, just present. Then he stopped himself, because imagining that life felt dangerous. It meant admitting that the one he chose might not have been the best version available. So he returned to routine, to work, to structure, to silence. And yet, no matter how full his schedule became, that quiet sense of something missing never fully left. It didn't demand attention. It simply waited, patient, like a question he had avoided answering for 5 years. Lambert attended the fundraiser because his name was on the invitation, not because he wanted to be there. It was one of those events that blended together after a while. Polite speeches, small talk, people congratulating each other for things that didn't feel personal. He arrived on time, shook the right hands, smiled at the right moments. Someone thanked him for his donation. Someone asked about his latest project. Someone made a joke about how busy he always was. Lambert responded automatically. His body knew the routine. Stand straight, listen, nod, reply. The room was warm, filled with quiet conversations and gentle laughter. Soft music played in the background. People moved slowly, careful not to interrupt each other's moments. Lambert was halfway through another conversation about work when something unexpected cut through the noise. A laugh, not loud, not attention-seeking, just familiar. His chest tightened before he even understood why. The sound didn't belong in this room. It belonged to a different life, a quieter one, and without thinking, Lambert turned toward it. At first, Lambert told himself it was nothing. Laughter carries easily in crowded spaces. People often sound alike from a distance. It could have been anyone, but his body didn't agree. The feeling in his chest deepened, slow and familiar, the way it used to when he heard her coming up behind him without warning. He tried to focus on the person in front of him, nodding at a comment he hadn't fully heard. Softer this time, and this time there was no doubt. It was the rhythm, the slight pause before it, as if she always decided whether something was funny before reacting. Lambert felt his throat go dry. 5 years had passed. He had built an entirely different life, yet that single sound pulled him backward in a way nothing else ever had. He didn't want to turn around. Not yet. Part of him hoped he was wrong, that if he didn't look, the moment would disappear and he could return to the safety of uncertainty, but he already knew. Some sounds don't belong to memory. They belong to people, and this one belonged to her. Lambert turned slowly, not because he was trying to be calm, but because moving too fast felt impossible. His eyes found Amy first. She stood near a small table, one hand resting lightly on the edge, her posture relaxed but attentive, like someone used to being aware of what was happening around her. She looked different, not in a way that felt distant, just fuller somehow, more grounded, like someone who had learned how to carry weight without showing it. Then he saw them. 2 children stood close to her, a boy and a girl. They were holding small cups, whispering to each other about something that made them smile. The boy leaned forward when he spoke, animated and curious. The girl listened carefully, her head tilted slightly, her expression thoughtful. Lambert's breath caught. He didn't know what he expected. But it wasn't this. They weren't abstract ideas. They weren't shadows of the past. They were real, standing there, moving, laughing, existing in a world he had chosen not to enter. The boy looked up at Amy and said something that made her smile and brush his hair back gently. The girl adjusted her grip on her cup and stepped a little closer to her mother's side. Lambert felt rooted to the floor. He wasn't thinking about the past anymore. He wasn't thinking about excuses or decisions or time lost. All he could think was one simple, overwhelming truth. These weren't possibilities. They were people. Lambert tried not to stare, but his eyes kept returning to them without permission. The boy turned his head slightly as he spoke, and Lambert felt a sudden tightness in his chest. The shape of his face, the way his eyebrows moved when he was excited. The same small crease appeared on his forehead when he frowned, the one Lambert had seen in the mirror his entire life. Then the girl laughed quietly, covering her mouth with her hand. She tilted her head in a way Lambert recognized instantly, not from memory, from habit, the exact way he did when he was unsure but curious at the same time. It was movement, the way their expressions changed before their words did. These weren't similarities you could explain away. They were patterns, the kind that passed through blood, not coincidence. Lambert felt his thoughts slow, as if his mind were trying to catch up with what his body already knew. No paperwork could explain this. No argument could erase it. He had spent years telling himself he needed proof. Standing here now, proof felt unnecessary. The truth was already visible in front of him, written on faces that looked like his. The boy was the first to notice Lambert. At first, he just stared, not in a rude way, in a curious way. like he was looking at something familiar without knowing why. He nudged his sister gently. "Ari," he whispered, still watching Lambert, "does that man look like us?" Ariana followed his gaze. Her eyes moved from Lambert's face to Cody's reflection in the nearby glass, then back again. She frowned slightly. "He does," she said softly. "Like, older." Lambert heard every word, his chest tightened, close enough to hear. Amy turned toward the children. "What are you talking about?" she asked. "That man," he said. "He looks like me," in recognition. She followed his finger, and for the first time, she saw Lambert standing there, watching them with a face that looked nothing like the man she had known 5 years ago. The room didn't feel loud anymore. It felt suspended, as if everyone inside it had paused without realizing why. 3 lives stood quietly in front of each other, and none of them knew what to say first. Amy didn't react right away. For a moment she simply looked at Lambert, her expression calm but alert, like someone meeting a memory they hadn't expected to see again. Then she looked back at the children. Her voice stayed gentle. "He used to be someone I knew," she said. Cody blinked. "From where?" Amy paused, choosing her words carefully. "From before you were born." Ariana studied Lambert closely, her eyes thoughtful. "Is he family?" she asked. Amy felt her chest tighten, but she kept her tone steady. "He was part of my life once," she replied. "That's all you need to know for now. Not cold, not angry, a boundary drawn quietly without explanation or drama." Cody looked between them. "Oh," he said. He didn't seem disappointed, just curious. But for Lambert, that single word landed heavier than anything else, because it confirmed something he had avoided thinking about for years. To these children, he wasn't a father who had left. He was simply a stranger they had never met. Lambert stood there, listening to Amy speak about him in the past tense. Not with emotion, just as a fact. He used to be someone I knew. To her, he wasn't a problem anymore. At Cody's restless energy, at Ariana's quiet awareness. He didn't need a test. He didn't need confirmation. He didn't need anyone to explain what he was seeing. 5 years of distance collapsed into a single moment of clarity. These weren't strangers. These were his children. Not in theory, not in possibility, in reality. And for the first time since the night Amy walked out of his apartment, Lambert felt something he could no longer ignore. He hadn't protected himself. He had abandoned something real, something living, something standing right in front of him, holding a cup of juice and wondering why a stranger felt familiar. And in that quiet realization, Lambert understood the truth that had waited 5 years for him to notice. Some mistakes don't disappear with time. They wait patiently for the moment you're finally ready to see them. Lambert didn't speak that night, not because he didn't want to, because he didn't know how. After the fundraiser, he stood at the edge of the room for a long time, watching Amy help the children put on their jackets, listening to Cody talk about something excitedly while Ariana held her mother's hand. He wanted to walk over, to say something meaningful, to explain himself, but every sentence he formed in his head sounded wrong, too late, too shallow, too focused on him. So he did the only thing that felt honest. He waited. A few days later, Lambert sent a message. Not long, not dramatic, just simple. "It was good to see you. I know I don't deserve anything, but I'd like to be part of their lives if you're open to that." Amy didn't reply immediately. When she did, her response was careful. "We can talk, but slowly." Lambert agreed without hesitation. The first meeting was awkward. They sat on opposite sides of a small table at a cafe that the twins colored quietly nearby while Amy watched everything with gentle alertness. Lambert didn't try to impress them. He didn't bring gifts. He didn't talk about himself. He simply asked Cody about his drawing and listened as Ariana explained what her favorite animal was. His voice felt strange in his own ears, softer than he was used to. Over time, he began showing up more. Not suddenly, not constantly, just consistently. He attended a school event and stood in the back of the room, clapping quietly while Cody searched the crowd for his mother and accidentally locked eyes with Lambert instead. Cody waved. Lambert waved back, a small moment, but it stayed with him for days. He started joining them for doctor visits, sitting beside Amy instead of across from her, listening as the nurse talked about growth charts and checkups. At first, he felt out of place, like he was pretending to belong somewhere he had no right to be. But no one told him to leave. Homework nights came next. Lambert sat at the table while Cody struggled with math and Ariana carefully colored inside lines. He didn't correct them. He didn't rush them. He just stayed. Just acceptance. Lambert never tried to use money to make things easier. He offered help, but never control. He waited to be invited, waited to be trusted. Slowly, something shifted. The twins stopped looking at him like a visitor. They started talking to him like someone who belonged. Ariana began sitting beside him on the couch without being asked. Cody started telling him stories about school before telling anyone else, and one night, after the twins were asleep, Amy finally said what she had been holding back. "I didn't need you to be perfect," she said quietly. "I just needed you to believe me." Lambert looked down at his hands. "I didn't know how to trust love without proof," he replied. "So, I trusted fear instead." Amy didn't respond right away. She just nodded, because for the first time, his words were followed by something real, not promises, not explanations, just a man finally learning how to stay. They didn't rush into it, not because anyone doubted the truth, but because some things felt too important to turn into a dramatic moment. The idea of a DNA test came up one evening after dinner, when Cody was explaining a school project about families, and Ariana was carefully lining up her toys by color. Lambert had been sitting on the floor with them listening, when Amy spoke quietly. "I understand," he replied. "Whatever makes this easier for them." They booked the appointment without ceremony. No tension, no arguments, just another date on the calendar. The waiting period felt longer than it should have, not because Lambert was afraid of the result, but because he was afraid of what it would confirm emotionally. Every day he spent with the twins made the answer feel more obvious. Cody's restless energy mirrored his own childhood. Ariana's quiet awareness reflected his way of observing before speaking. The test felt like paperwork catching up to reality. When the results arrived, Amy opened the email first. She read it once, then again, then looked up at Lambert. "It's confirmed," she said softly. "You're their father." Not because he was shocked, because something inside him finally relaxed. Acceptance. He had spent years convincing himself that uncertainty was safety. That evening, Cody overheard part of their conversation. He walked into the room holding a notebook from school. "So you're really our dad?" he asked. Lambert crouched down to his level. "Yes," he said. "If you want me to be—" Cody didn't hesitate. "Are you visiting again tomorrow?" he asked. Lambert smiled. "I was hoping I could stay longer than that." Ariana looked up from her drawing. "You mean, like stay for real?" Lambert nodded. "If you'll let me." Cody thought for a moment, then smiled. "Okay," he said, "but you have to help me with math." That was it. No dramatic speeches, no emotional declarations, just a simple truth settling into place, not through paperwork, through presence. And for the first time in 5 years, Lambert didn't feel like he was stepping into someone else's life. He felt like he was finally returning to his own. Years passed in a way that didn't feel dramatic. There were no big announcements, no sudden transformations, just a steady rhythm that slowly replaced everything Lambert thought he knew about life. Mornings became louder, not with noise from the city, but with voices in the kitchen. Cody arguing about breakfast, Ariana reminding everyone where things were supposed to go. Lambert learned which cereal was never acceptable, which socks were always missing, and which school days required extra patience. He learned how to wait, how to listen, how to be present without needing to control the outcome. One afternoon, Lambert stood in the yard watching the twins play. Cody was running in uneven circles, inventing rules that changed every few minutes. Ariana sat nearby, building something carefully from sticks and leaves, focused in her own quiet world. Their laughter filled the space in a way no apartment ever had. Amy stepped outside and stood beside him. "Do you ever regret anything?" she asked. Lambert didn't answer immediately. He thought about the 5 years he had missed, the birthdays he never attended, the moments he could never get back. "I regret 5 years," he said softly, "but I'm grateful I didn't lose the rest of my life." That answer was enough. The twins ran toward them, breathless and smiling, arms open without hesitation. Lambert knelt down, catching them both as they collided into him, their laughter warm and real. And for the first time, he didn't feel afraid of what he could lose. He felt grateful for what he had finally learned how to keep. Not perfection, not certainty, just presence. And that, he realized, was the only thing that had ever mattered.